"Run, it's going to explode," the single dad mechanic warned, and the Millionaire CEO turned pale. I'm Adam, 37 years old, aircraft mechanic, single dad, and about 3 weeks ago, my entire life got flipped upside down, and then somehow, it got put back together in a way I never could have seen coming. Let me back up a little so this makes sense. I've been working at Hargrove Aviation Services for almost 9 years. Small outfit, not glamorous, not the kind of place you brag about at dinner parties, but honest work. And I was good at it. Real good. The kind of good where your supervisor calls you in on your day off because nobody else trusts their hands on a specific engine the way they trust yours. I wasn't the loudest guy in the hangar. I wasn't the one cracking jokes by the vending machine or organizing the Friday beer runs. I was the one in the corner with grease under my fingernails and a flashlight in my mouth, checking things twice because once was never enough. That was me. That's always been me. I raised Angel the same way. Quiet. Thorough. Don't cut corners, don't take shortcuts, and never assume something's fine just because it looks fine on the surface. Her mom left when Angel was 8 months old. Just left. Packed a bag, said she wasn't built for this, and walked out the front door like she was going to grab milk and never came back. I don't say that with bitterness anymore. I used to, God knows I used to. But these days it's just a fact, a piece of our story. Angel doesn't ask about her much anymore. She drew a picture once, a few years back, that she labeled My Family, just her and me and our dog Wrencher. Yeah, I named my dog Wrencher. Don't judge me. And when I saw it on the fridge, I had to go outside and sit on the front steps for a minute because something about that hit me square in the chest. Not with sadness exactly, more like, wait, the good kind. The kind that tells you this matters, don't mess it up. So that's the life I built. So small, simple, held together with routine and love, and the kind of tired that only single dads understand. The 6 a.m. lunches, the parent-teacher conferences you attend smelling like jet fuel, the nights you eat cereal for dinner because cooking for one adult just doesn't feel worth it. But it was mine. We were good. We were stable. And then came that Tuesday. Angel had a half day at school, some teacher development thing, so I'd brought her into work with me, which wasn't unusual. My supervisor, Carl, a big bear of a man who wore the same faded Steelers cap every single day, had a soft spot for Angel that he'd never admit out loud. She had her little folding chair set up in the corner of Bay 3 with her sketchbook and her colored pencils, drawing what she called airplanes with feelings. I checked on her every 20 minutes or so, and every single time she was perfectly content, humming to herself, not bothering a soul. The plane I was assigned to that day was a Bombardier Challenger 350. Corporate jet. Top of the line, the kind of aircraft that costs more than every house on my street combined. Belonged to Whitmore Capital Group. I'd worked on it a few times before. Clean bird, usually well maintained. I was doing a standard pre-flight inspection, nothing unusual, just going through the checklist the way I always did, methodical. No skipping, no rushing. When I got to the hydraulic system on the starboard landing gear assembly, I almost missed it. I want to be honest about that, because I think it matters. If I hadn't been in a slightly awkward position, crouched down in a way that caught the light at a weird angle, I might have moved on and never noticed. But something made me stop. A tiny, almost imperceptible discoloration around one of the hydraulic line fittings. Like the fluid had been seeping, just barely, for a little while. I leaned in closer, put my finger near it, and that's when I felt it. The faintest warmth, the microscopic slickness of hydraulic fluid so fresh it hadn't even dried yet. My stomach dropped. I won't bore you with all the technical details, but here's what you need to know. A hydraulic failure on landing gear at the wrong moment doesn't just mean the wheels don't come down. It can mean total loss of control. It can mean the plane goes nose first into a runway at 200 miles per hour. It can mean everyone on board doesn't come home. I flagged it immediately, pulled the aircraft. Told Carl we had a critical hold. That's when she walked in. Alicia Whitmore, 29 years old, CEO of Whitmore Capital Group. I'd seen her name on the work orders before, but I'd never actually seen her. And let me tell you, she was not what I expected. I think I'd built up some vague image in my head of a CEO type. Older, stiff, the kind of person who communicates exclusively through assistants. But the woman who walked into Bay 3 that afternoon looked like someone had taken ambition and pressed it into human form. Sharp jaw, dark eyes that moved around the room like they were doing calculations, wearing a charcoal blazer over dark jeans, a thin gold watch on her left wrist that she kept checking the way people do when they're already annoyed before anything's even happened. Her hair was pulled back tight and she had this energy about her, this certainty, like every room she walked into had been expecting her. She looked at the aircraft. She looked at me. Then she looked at Carl. "What's the delay?" she said. Not rude, exactly, just direct. The kind of voice that didn't waste syllables. Carl started explaining. I stayed where I was, crouched near the landing gear, and I wasn't really paying attention to the back and forth because I was still thinking about that fitting. Something wasn't sitting right with me. Not just the defect itself. Defects happen, wear and tear is real. But where it was. The specific location. The specific type of seepage. Something felt deliberate in a way I couldn't quite articulate yet. Then I heard footsteps approaching and I looked up and she was standing right there, looking down at me with an expression I hadn't seen before. Not anger, not impatience, something else. Something almost like the moment before you realize you're scared. "You're the one who flagged it?" she asked. "Yes, ma'am," I said. I straightened up, wiped my hands on a shop rag. I think I was about a foot taller than her, but somehow she didn't seem shorter. "Walk me through it," she said. So I did. I crouched back down and I explained in plain language what I'd found and what it meant. I didn't talk down to her, but I didn't assume she knew the technical vocabulary either. I just talked to her like a person, like I'd talk to a neighbor who asked me what was wrong with their car. And she listened. Actually listened. Didn't interrupt, didn't glance at her phone, didn't do that thing people do where they're nodding, but you can tell their mind is somewhere else. She looked at exactly where I was pointing, and she asked 2 questions. Smart questions, specific questions. And when I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she went pale. Not dramatically, not the movie version. Just this quiet, gradual draining of color from her face, like someone slowly turning down a dimmer switch. She pressed her lips together and looked at the aircraft, and I watched her do the math in real time. Where she would have been sitting. What altitude, what moment, what outcome. "Thank you," she said finally. Quiet. Just 2 words, but they landed different from how people usually say it. They had weight. I nodded. I told her we'd have it sorted and she could reschedule the flight once we'd done a full hydraulic system inspection. She nodded back and walked away, and I watched her go for just a second before turning back to the plane. Angel had wandered over at some point, silently, the way she always did, and was standing about 5 feet away holding her sketchbook to her chest, watching Alicia leave. "Dad," she said quietly. "Yeah, Bug?" That lady had scary eyes. I almost laughed. Scary how? Angel thought about it for a second. Like she's used to being the one who saves people, not the one who gets saved. I looked at my 7-year-old daughter and I thought, "Kid, you might be the smartest person in this building." I didn't know then how right she was. I didn't know that in a few hours everything was going to start unraveling in a way that would turn my whole quiet, grease-stained life completely inside out. But it started there. In Bay 3. With a defect the size of a thumbnail and a woman who went pale for the first time in probably years. And with a man named Joseph, somewhere across town who'd just realized his plan had failed. I didn't go home right away after my shift. That should have been my first sign that something was eating at me. Because on a normal day, the second my boots hit the parking lot, I'm already mentally switching gears. Thinking about what Angel wants for dinner, whether she did her reading homework, if Wrencher needs a walk. My brain has this automatic factory reset the moment I clock out. Work stays at work. Home stays home. That's always been the deal I made with myself. But that Tuesday, I sat in my truck for a good 15 minutes before I even turned the key. I kept replaying the fitting in my head. The specific angle of the seepage. The warmth. The location. I'd seen hydraulic wear before. I'd seen it 100 times, and it almost never looks like that. Wear has a pattern. It spreads outward. It accumulates unevenly depending on pressure cycles. It leaves a kind of story behind if you know how to read it. What I'd found that afternoon didn't read like a story. It read like a sentence. One deliberate, precise sentence. I shook it off. Or at least I tried to. Angel was in the back seat with Wrencher's leash already in her hand before I'd even pulled out of the lot, because she'd made me promise that morning we'd stop by Riverside Park on the way home. Wrencher was waiting for us at Mrs. Delgado's place next door, our unofficial dog-sitting arrangement that I repaid in oil changes and grocery runs. And the second Angel had that leash clicked onto his collar, she was gone, sprinting toward the path that ran along the water, her backpack bouncing, her sneakers already getting wet from the grass. I watched her run and I felt that thing again. That weight. The good kind. Wrencher was an enormous, ridiculous-looking basset hound mix with ears so long they dragged in puddles and an expression of permanent, dignified disappointment, like he'd expected more from life and was making peace with what he got. Angel loved him with a ferocity that was almost alarming. She'd once cried for 40 minutes because he'd looked sad during a thunderstorm. I'd had to explain, very carefully, that his face just looked like that. We stayed at the park longer than we should have. The evening light was doing that golden thing it does in late October, painting everything amber and long-shadowed. And Angel found a stick she declared, the best stick ever found in recorded history, and I didn't have the heart to rush her. So I sat on the bench and I let my mind go back to the hangar, and I turned that image over and over like a stone I couldn't put down. By the time we got home and I'd heated up some leftover pasta and gotten Angel through her bath and into bed, it was past 9. She made me read 2 chapters of her book, some story about a girl who discovers her grandmother was secretly a cartographer, and I did the voices, like I always did, even though I was running on fumes. When her breathing finally evened out and I was sure she was asleep, I went and sat at the kitchen table with a beer I didn't really want, and I pulled out my phone. I looked up Joseph Calloway. I don't know exactly what made me do it. Instinct? Maybe. Something Carl had said earlier that afternoon that I hadn't fully registered in the moment. Something about how the pre-inspection sign-off for that aircraft had been expedited, pushed through faster than normal, on request from someone in Whitmore Capital's operations team. A name had been mentioned. Calloway. I'd half heard it while I was still focused on the hydraulic system and then filed it away somewhere in the back of my head without thinking about it consciously. But sitting there at my kitchen table at 9:15 at night, it surfaced. Joseph Calloway, CFO of Whitmore Capital Group. His LinkedIn photo was the first thing that came up. And I'll be honest with you, something about the guy made the hair on the back of my neck stand up in a way I couldn't justify rationally. He was maybe 55, silver-haired, built like someone who used to play competitive sports and still wanted you to know it. He had the kind of smile that was technically a smile, all the right muscles in all the right places. But it never reached his eyes, not in a single photo, not even the candid ones from company events where everyone else around him was genuinely laughing. He had the face of a man who was always performing, always managing a room, never actually in it. I told myself I was being paranoid. I closed the browser, finished half the beer, and went to bed. The next morning was normal, completely, blessedly normal. Angel had a spelling test she was nervous about. She kept mixing up necessary and necessary in a way that made no grammatical sense but was completely her. And I quizzed her over breakfast 3 times until she had it solid. I dropped her at school, drove to work, clocked in. That's when Carl called me into his office. I want to describe Carl's office to you because it matters for the context. It was a room roughly the size of a large bathroom, with walls that hadn't been repainted since the Clinton administration. A coffee maker that only worked if you held the button down for exactly 3 seconds before releasing it. And a corkboard absolutely covered in overlapping memos, shift schedules, and a single photograph of Carl at what appeared to be a youth football game, circa 2009. He was a man of clutter and routine, and I'd sat in that office dozens of times without it ever feeling anything other than ordinary. That morning it felt different. He was standing when I came in, which he almost never did. He was a sit-down kind of man. The fact that he was standing with his arms crossed and his Steelers cap pushed back on his head told me before he opened his mouth that something had gone sideways. "Close the door," he said. I closed it. "I need you to listen to me carefully," he said. and his voice had this careful, measured quality to it, like he was handling something that might break. And I need you to not react until I'm finished. I sat down. Okay. He exhaled through his nose. Got a call this morning, from a guy named Calloway over at Whitmore Capital. And there it was. That name again. Like a stone dropped into still water. He's filing a formal complaint, Carl said. Against you. I stared at him. Against me. He's claiming that the defect you flagged yesterday was, and I'm quoting here, manufactured. He's saying that you deliberately tampered with the hydraulic fitting to delay the flight, and that the whole thing was a setup. The silence that followed was so complete I could hear the coffee maker cycling in the corner. I opened my mouth, closed it, opened it again. Carl, I know, he said, quietly. You know that's insane, right? You know I would never, Adam. He held up one hand, held up. I know. I have known you for 9 years. I know what kind of mechanic you are, and I know what kind of man you are. I'm not questioning what I know. He paused. But I'm getting pressure from above me. Corporate's involved now. There's talk of an external audit of the inspection, and until that audit is completed, I've been told I need to put you on administrative leave. The word leave hit me like cold water. Paid, he added quickly. It's paid, Adam. And I'm fighting this. I want you to know I'm fighting it. But I could see in his face, in the way his jaw was tight and his eyes weren't quite meeting mine, that he didn't know if fighting was going to be enough. Carl was a good man, but Carl was also one man in a chain of people who answered to other people. And the thing about chains is that sometimes one person's decency isn't enough to stop the whole thing from pulling. I drove home in a kind of white static. That's the only way I can describe it. Not rage. Rage comes later. I've learned that about myself. In the immediate aftermath of something that blindsides me, I go quiet. I go still. I drove 15 miles per hour under the speed limit, stopped at a yellow light I could have made, parked in my driveway and sat there for a while before I went inside. I called my sister, Dana. She lived 2 states over and she was the person I called when I didn't know what else to do, which wasn't often, but when it happened it was always her. She picked up on the second ring the way she always did. Dana had a 6th sense for when I was calling with real stuff versus just to talk, and I told her everything. The plane, the fitting, the woman going pale, the name Calloway, and now this. She was quiet for a long time. Then she said, Adam, whoever this Calloway is, he's scared. Scared of what? Of what you saw, she said. People don't move this fast to cover something up unless there's something real to cover. I turned that over in my mind for the rest of the afternoon. I picked Angel up from school. She'd aced the spelling test. She showed me the paper before she'd even gotten fully into the truck. And I made sure my face did what I needed it to do, which was be dad, be present, be normal. We made tacos for dinner. She showed me a drawing she'd done in class of what she called the airplane lady, Alicia, rendered in purple crayon with disproportionately large eyes and a very serious expression. Accurate, honestly. I put her to bed. I did the voices. I waited until she was asleep. And then I sat back down at that kitchen table and I started writing everything down. Every detail, every timestamp, everything I remembered about that fitting and the sequence of events and Carl's words and the name that kept appearing like a watermark beneath everything else. Joseph Calloway. I didn't know yet what I was going to do with any of it. But something in me, that same part that crouches down and looks twice when everyone else has already moved on, knew that whatever was coming next, I was going to need receipts, and I was going to need to be ready. The call from Child Services came on a Thursday morning. I was in the middle of making Angel's lunch, peanut butter and honey on wheat, the crusts cut off in a diagonal because she'd decided at age 5 that diagonal crusts tasted better than straight ones, and I'd never had the heart to challenge the theory, when my phone buzzed on the counter. Unknown number, local area code. I almost let it go to voicemail. I almost didn't pick up. I picked up. The woman on the other end introduced herself as Sandra Oakes, a caseworker with the County Department of Family Services. She had a voice that was professionally neutral in a way that felt almost surgical. Not warm. Not cold. Just carefully. Deliberately even. She said she was calling regarding a welfare concern that had been reported anonymously about my household. About Angel. I put down the knife. I don't think I moved for a full 3 seconds. I just stood there in my kitchen with peanut butter on my thumb and the sandwich half made on the counter, and I felt something happen in my chest that I don't have a clean word for. It wasn't panic exactly. It was more like the feeling you get when you're driving and you suddenly realize the road ahead is slicker than you thought. That split-second recalibration where your whole body goes on alert before your brain has fully caught up. "I'm sorry," I said. "A concern about what?" "Concern." "Exactly?" She explained carefully and without editorial that an anonymous report had been filed suggesting that my home environment might be unstable, that there were questions about supervision, about financial stability, about whether my work schedule left Angel without adequate care. She said it was standard procedure to follow up on all reports regardless of source, and that she'd like to schedule a home visit at my earliest convenience. I asked her when the report had been filed. "Wednesday evening," she said, "the day after I'd been placed on administrative leave." I thanked her. I told her I understood completely and that she was welcome to visit any time, the sooner the better, because there was absolutely nothing in my home or my life that I was concerned about her seeing. I wrote down her number. I said goodbye. I hung up. Then I stood at my kitchen counter for probably 2 full minutes without moving. Angel came padding into the kitchen in her socks. She had this pair with little foxes on them that she wore until they were nearly translucent. And she looked at my face and immediately said, "Dad, what happened?" Not a question. A statement. She was 7 years old and she read me like a book she'd already memorized. "Nothing serious, Bug," I said. And I meant it, in the sense that I was not going to let it become serious. But I also knew, standing in that kitchen, that whoever was behind this, and I had no doubt who was behind this, had just made a very specific calculation. They hadn't just come after my job. They'd come after my daughter. That was the moment something shifted in me. Not loudly, not dramatically. Just a quiet, internal click, like a bolt sliding home. I finished making the sandwich. I cut it diagonal. I drove Angel to school and I walked her to her classroom door the way I always did. And I crouched down and straightened the collar of her jacket, and she gave me a hug that lasted a little longer than usual, like she could still sense something even though I hadn't said a word. Then she went inside and I walked back to my truck and I sat there, and I called my sister again. Dana, God bless her, answered before the second ring. "They filed a child services report," I said. The silence on her end was brief, and then it was replaced by something I didn't often hear from Dana, which was the particular kind of quiet fury that only comes from a woman who has watched her brother hold things together alone for 7 years. "Okay," she said, and her voice was completely controlled in the way that meant she was anything but. "Okay. Listen to me. You need a lawyer, Adam. I can't afford—" "You need a lawyer," she said again, not a suggestion. She was right, and I knew it. The problem was that my savings, while not non-existent, were the kind that existed for real emergencies: car transmission, burst pipe, Angel's asthma medication that insurance covered inconsistently, not for legal fees. Administrative leave was paid, but it wasn't full salary, and the idea of burning through that buffer on attorney consultations made my stomach turn. But Dana had already moved on, the way Dana always did when she made up her mind. "I know someone," she said. "A friend from college. She practices employment law in your state. She's good, and she owes me a favor I've never cashed in. I'm calling her today." I started to protest. She talked over me. "Adam, someone filed a false complaint to get you fired and then reported your daughter to child services within 24 hours. This is not a misunderstanding. This is a campaign. Let me help you. I don't ask for help easily. I think most single dads will understand that without much explanation. You spend so many years being the only person standing between your kid and everything that could go wrong, that asking for help starts to feel like admitting a structural failure. Like you're not enough. I know rationally that's not true. But knowing something rationally and feeling it are 2 different countries." I said yes. Dana called me back 2 hours later with a name, Rebecca Holt. Employment and civil litigation, 12 years in practice. currently handling a wrongful termination case that was apparently making some waves in the local legal community. Dana described her as the kind of woman who treats injustice like a personal insult. I liked her immediately based solely on that description. I called Rebecca Holt at 11:15 that morning. She picked up herself. No receptionist, no assistant. And when I introduced myself and said Dana Vasquez had given me her number, there was a brief pause and then she said, "Okay, tell me everything. Don't summarize. Don't edit for what you think I need to know. All of it." So I told her all of it. The plane, the fitting, the pale woman, the formal complaint, the administrative leave, the child services call. I talked for probably 20 minutes without her interrupting once. When I finished, she was quiet for just a moment. Then she said, "The timing of that child services report is your strongest asset right now." "How so?" "Because anonymous reports filed within hours of an adverse employment action by someone with clear motive to discredit you establish a pattern. It's not just a complaint anymore, it's part of a coordinated effort to harm you. That's a different legal animal entirely." She paused. "I'm going to need the name of the person who filed the complaint against you with Whitmore Capital." "Joseph Calloway," I said. "CFO." Another pause, shorter this time. "I know that name," she said. And there was something careful in how she said it that I noticed but didn't press. "Okay, here's what I need you to do. Write everything down in order with timestamps wherever you can recall them. Any text messages, any emails, any communications related to the inspection or the complaint. Save everything. Screenshot, print, back it up twice. Don't talk to anyone at your company about this except your direct supervisor, and only in writing from here on out." I told her I'd already started writing things down the night before. She said, "Good. Keep doing that. And Adam, don't do anything impulsive. I know that's not what you want to hear right now, but trust me on this. The best thing you can do is build the case clean." I thanked her. She told me she'd be in touch within 48 hours and to call if anything new developed. Then she hung up, and I sat in my truck in a grocery store parking lot. Because that's where I'd pulled over to take the call, and I looked out through the windshield at absolutely nothing. And I breathed for a while. I thought about Alicia Whitmore. I'd thought about her more than I wanted to admit over the past 2 days. Not in a complicated way, not yet, but in the way you think about something unresolved. A calculation that won't close. She had looked at me in that hangar with those dark, precise eyes, and she had thanked me. And in that moment I'd believed it was genuine. I still believed it. But she worked with this man. She trusted this man, presumably. And either she didn't know what he'd done or she did. And I had no way of knowing which one it was. The not knowing was almost worse than the rest of it. I picked Angel up at 3:15. She talked the whole way home about a boy in her class named Marcus who'd brought a Venus flytrap for show and tell and then cried when the teacher wouldn't let him feed it a live fly inside the classroom. She thought this was the funniest thing that had ever happened in human history. I listened to every word and I laughed in the right places, and I was completely, fully present for every second of it, because that is the contract I made with myself 7 years ago, and I had never once broken it. I was not going to start now. After dinner, after bath, after the book and the voices and the tucking in, I went out to the back porch. It was cold. That sharp, clean October cold that smells like dead leaves and distant wood smoke. And I sat in the old camp chair I kept out there, and I let myself feel it all for a few minutes. The anger, the fear, the specific gnawing helplessness of being a man who did the right thing and got punished for it while the people who did the wrong thing still had their offices and their titles and their carefully managed smiles. I let it come, and then I let it settle. Because here's what I've learned. In 37 years and 7 years of solo parenting and 9 years of working on machines that will kill you if you lose focus. Feelings are information, not instructions. Feel them, understand what they're telling you, and then decide deliberately what you're going to do next. What I was going to do next was build something so airtight that when it all came out, and it was going to come out, I'd decided that sitting in that porch chair in the cold, there would be no room for doubt, no room for maneuvering. No soft edges for a man like Joseph Calloway to find his way out through. I went inside. I opened my laptop. I started a new document. At the top of the page I wrote one line, and then I stared at it for a moment before I decided to leave it exactly as it was. Everything I saw. In order. For Angel. And then I started writing. Rebecca Holt called me back in 36 hours, not 48. I remember because Angel had just gotten home from school and was doing her homework at the kitchen table. She'd spread her colored pencils across the entire surface in a way that left approximately 4 inches of usable space, which she seemed to consider more than adequate. And my phone buzzed and I stepped out onto the back porch to take it, closing the sliding door behind me so Angel wouldn't hear the tension I knew was going to be in my voice no matter how hard I tried to manage it. "I've been doing some digging," Rebecca said, skipping hello entirely, which I was already learning was just how she operated. "And Adam, I need you to understand something before I tell you what I found. What I'm about to say is going to make you angry, possibly very angry. I need you to hear it, sit with it, and not do anything with it until we talk through next steps. Can you do that?" I leaned against the porch railing. The backyard looked small in the afternoon gray, Wrencher's chew toy abandoned in the middle of the dead grass, the old oak in the corner already stripped bare. "Yeah," I said. "I can do that. Joseph Calloway has done this before," she said. The cold air felt sharper suddenly. There was a maintenance supervisor at a charter company called Skybridge Aviation, about 4 years ago. Man named Gerald Pruitt. He flagged an irregularity on an aircraft that Calloway had personally arranged to have signed off early. Different company, similar situation. Pruitt was pushed out within 2 weeks. Complaint filed against his professional license. Nothing that rose to criminal, nothing that stuck publicly, but enough to make him unemployable in the industry for almost 3 years. She paused. "I found him. We talked this morning." I pressed my thumb against the wooden railing hard enough to feel the grain. He confirmed it. He confirmed enough. He was hesitant, understandably given what happened to him. But once I explained your situation, he opened up. He said Calloway had a pattern of using third-party maintenance contracts as cover for cost manipulations, skimming on inspections, accelerating sign-offs on aircraft that needed more work, then routing the difference into accounts that weren't visible on standard audits. When Pruitt got too close, Calloway moved to discredit him. She let that land. Sound familiar? I exhaled slowly through my nose. Yeah, it does. Here's what I think happened with the Whitmore aircraft, Rebecca said. And her voice dropped just slightly. Not softer, but more precise. The way someone gets when they're about to say something they've thought through very carefully. I think Calloway has been running some version of this scheme inside Whitmore Capital for a while. Cutting maintenance costs in ways that don't show up cleanly on the books. Pocketing the difference, keeping it small enough to stay under the radar. The hydraulic issue on that aircraft, I don't think it was purely accidental wear. I think an inspection that should have caught it was deliberately cleared. So when I flagged it, "You didn't just delay a flight," she said. "You created a paper trail. An official record of a defect that, according to the signed inspection report, should not have existed. If anyone started pulling threads on why a critical hydraulic fault appeared on an aircraft that had been cleared 48 hours earlier, Calloway's entire operation starts to unravel." She paused again. "You became a liability the moment you crouched down and looked twice." I stood there on that porch and I didn't say anything for a moment. I watched a sparrow land on the oak branch, look around with its quick, jerky little movements and fly away. Something about that bird bothered me in a way I couldn't articulate. Maybe just the randomness of it, the indifference of it, the fact that the world just kept going about its business while I was out here trying to hold mine together. "Rebecca," I said finally, "what about Alicia Whitmore? Does she know any of this?" The pause this time was different. Thoughtful, not tactical. "I don't know," she said honestly. "Calloway has been with Whitmore Capital since before Alicia took over as CEO. Her father brought him in. He's been there long enough to build infrastructure that someone running a company day-to-day might not see clearly, especially if she trusts him as a legacy figure." Another pause, "But here's the thing. Adam, whether she knows or not changes the emotional calculus, not the legal one. What matters legally is documentation, pattern, and evidence, and we're building all three." She walked me through what she needed next. A written account of every communication I'd had regarding the aircraft inspection, the work order, the flag, anything verbal that I could place on a timeline. She was also going to formally request, through proper channels, the full maintenance log for the Whitmore aircraft going back 18 months. And she was going to reach back out to Gerald Pruitt to see if he was willing to put anything in writing. "One more thing," she said just before we wrapped up. "The child services visit, when is it scheduled?" "Monday afternoon," I said. "Good, I'm going to be there." I started to say that probably wasn't necessary, that it was just a standard welfare check and my home was completely, and she said, "Adam, someone filed that report to destabilize you, to make you feel like even your home isn't safe. I'm going to be there because I want whoever is watching to understand that you are not navigating this alone anymore." She said it plainly, no drama, no theater, just fact. Something about that, the quiet certainty of it, loosened something in my chest that had been wound tight for days. I went back inside. Angel looked up from her homework, pencil tucked behind her ear, reading glasses slightly crooked on her nose. She'd needed a weak prescription since first grade, and they were always crooked, always, no matter how many times I gently straightened them. "Who was that?" she asked. "A lawyer," I said. She considered this with the gravity of someone who'd watched enough legal procedurals with me on Friday nights to have opinions. "Are we in trouble?" I sat down across from her at the table, right in the middle of the colored pencil arrangement, and I looked at her face, her serious little face with her mom's eyes and my stubborn jaw. And I said, "No, Bug. Someone else might be in trouble, though." She nodded slowly, like this was reasonable and expected. Then she picked up her pencil and went back to her homework. That was Angel, the most grounding 6 inches of humanity I'd ever encountered. The weekend passed in that particular kind of suspended tension where you're waiting for things to develop and trying to live normally at the same time. I cleaned the house, not because it needed it urgently, but because I needed to do something with my hands, and also because Sandra Oaks was coming on Monday, and I wanted every single surface to be immaculate. Not performatively immaculate, not staged. I didn't put out fresh flowers or hide the mismatched cups, but genuinely, thoroughly clean in the way that said a person who cares lives here. Saturday evening, Dana called to check in. She asked how I was really doing, the way she always did, not the surface version, the actual version. And I told her I was somewhere between fine and not fine, which she accepted because she knew what it meant. She told me Rebecca had reached out to her with an update and that things were moving. She also told me gently but directly, the way only sisters can, that I needed to eat more than cereal and to sleep more than 5 hours. I ate soup. I slept 6 hours. Small victories. Sunday I took Angel to the farmer's market 2 towns over, which we did most Sundays when the weather allowed. She had a system. She insisted on walking the entire market once before buying anything, surveying all options before committing, which was a habit she'd developed entirely on her own, and which I found both mildly hilarious and deeply recognizable. She bought a small jar of wildflower honey from a man with an extraordinary mustache she described afterward as the most impressive thing she'd ever seen on a face. I bought apples and tried not to think about Monday. Sunday night I got a text from a number I didn't recognize. It was short, 9 words. "I know you didn't do what they said." I stared at it for a long time, then I typed back, "Who is this?" 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. "Alicia Whitmore. I'd like to talk if you're open to it. Not as CEO, just as someone who owes you something." I set the phone down on the kitchen table and I looked at it like it was a live wire. My first instinct, and I want to be honest about this, was suspicion. Not of her specifically, not yet, but of the situation, of the timing, of the possibility, however small, that this was Calloway's move. Get Alicia to make contact, gauge what I knew, figure out how much of a threat I actually was. I'd been accused of manufacturing a defect. I'd had child services called on me. I had no particular reason to extend trust easily. But I also thought about that moment in the hangar, the way she'd gone pale, the way she'd said thank you like she meant the full weight of it. And I thought about Angel's drawing, the purple crayon woman with the serious eyes, and something in me said that wasn't a performance. You can't perform the color leaving your face. I picked up the phone. I'm open, I typed. But I want to be straightforward with you. I have a lawyer, and I'm documenting everything. I'm not saying that as a threat. Just so you know where I'm at. The response came back in under a minute. That's fair. Honestly, that makes me trust you more, not less. Can we meet Tuesday? Somewhere public, no assistants, no lawyers, just a conversation. I thought about it for longer than the length of silence probably suggested was comfortable on her end. Then I typed, "There's a diner on Callaway Street." And then I stopped. Stared at what I just typed. The street name, of all the streets. I deleted it and typed, "There's a diner called May's on Porter Avenue. Tuesday at noon. I'll be the one who smells like aviation hydraulic fluid." A pause. Then, "I'll find you." I put the phone down and sat back, and for the first time in 6 days I felt something that wasn't dread or anger, or that low grinding exhaustion of a man holding the walls up by himself. I felt like the tide might be turning. Just slightly. Just enough to notice, but in my experience, when with machines, with life, that's how it always starts. Not with a dramatic shift. Not with a moment you could point to later and say there, that's when everything changed. It starts with something small. A hairline shift in the pressure. A degree of change in the temperature. Something you'd only catch if you knew how to look. And looking closely had always been my thing. I got to May's 20 minutes early. Not because I was nervous. Okay. Maybe a little because I was nervous. But mostly because I'm the kind of person who needs to know a room before something important happens in it. I need to find the seat with my back to the wall. I need to know where the exits are, where the noise is coming from, whether the lighting is going to make a conversation feel exposed or contained. It's a mechanic thing, maybe. Or maybe it's just a single dad thing. Always scouting the environment before your kid arrives. Cataloging what could go wrong before it does. May's was the kind of diner that had existed for so long, it had stopped trying to be anything other than exactly what it was. The booths were a deep burgundy vinyl, cracked along the seams and repaired with tape that had been there long enough to become part of the aesthetic. The laminated menus had photographs so faded the food looked vaguely historical. The coffee came in thick ceramic mugs that had probably survived things I couldn't imagine, and the woman behind the counter, May herself, allegedly, though I'd never confirmed this, had silver hair pinned up with what appeared to be a pencil and reading glasses on a beaded chain around her neck. And she moved through that space with the unhurried authority of someone who had decided long ago that she was not in a rush, and the world could adjust accordingly. I took the booth in the back corner, ordered coffee, watched the door. She walked in at exactly noon. I don't know what I was expecting. Exactly. I'd only seen her twice. Once in the hangar in full CEO mode. Once in my head in Angel's purple crayon rendering. And somehow, I'd managed to build this slightly intimidating composite image of her in my mind over the past week. All precision and controlled energy and that quiet, crackling sense of someone who was always 3 moves ahead. What walked through the door of May's at noon on a Tuesday was something slightly different. She was wearing dark jeans and a plain cream-colored sweater, hair down for the first time, a canvas tote bag over one shoulder that had a small tear at the bottom seam. No entourage, no assistant with a tablet. No driver waiting at the curb that I could see. She looked around the diner with those same dark, calculating eyes. That part was still the same. But when she spotted me in the corner booth, something in her shoulders dropped about half an inch. Just slightly, just enough that I noticed it. She made her way over and slid into the seat across from me, and for a moment, neither of us said anything. May appeared immediately, poured her a coffee without being asked, and disappeared again with the efficiency of someone who had been reading tables for 40 years. Alicia wrapped both hands around the mug. Her nails were short, unpainted. There was a faint ink mark on the side of her right index finger. The kind you get from writing something down in a hurry. "I almost didn't come," she said. "Okay," I said. "Not because I didn't want to." She looked at me directly. "Because I wasn't sure I had the right to. After everything that's happened to you in the past week, that I didn't stop. I wasn't sure showing up here was something I'd earned." I looked at her for a moment. "Did you know about the complaint Callaway filed against me?" "No," she said. Immediately, no hesitation. I found out Friday afternoon. One of the junior analysts on my ops team mentioned it in passing. She assumed I'd been briefed. I hadn't. Her jaw tightened slightly. I was not briefed. And the child services report? Something moved behind her eyes. Not guilt, exactly. More like the specific, focused anger of someone who has just understood the full shape of a betrayal. I found out about that Saturday morning, she said quietly. One of my assistants saw something in an internal communication she wasn't supposed to see and brought it to me because she didn't know what else to do with it. She paused. Adam, I want you to know. The moment I understood what had been done, I started pulling at every thread I could reach. Quietly, carefully, but I started. I turned my coffee mug in a slow circle on the table, thinking about what Rebecca had told me, about Gerald Pruitt, about the pattern, about the maintenance cost skimming and the cleared inspections and the way Calloway had done this before. Cleanly, to a man who'd had no one in his corner when it happened. There was another guy, I said. Before me. 4 years ago, named Gerald Pruitt. The name hit her. I watched it land. Watched her eyes change, just slightly, the way eyes do when a piece of information clicks into a place where another piece already was. My lawyer found him, I said. He's willing to talk. Alicia set her coffee down very carefully. How long has this been going on? She said, and it wasn't really a question. It was the sound of someone doing arithmetic they didn't want to do and arriving at an answer they liked even less. Long enough to be a pattern, I said. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said something I wasn't expecting. My father hired Joseph when I was 19. Before I was anywhere near running the company. He is brilliant at what he does, genuinely. The public-facing version of him is real, I think. The financial acuity, the strategic instincts. But there's always been a version of Joseph that I couldn't fully see, no matter how long I looked. Like a room in a house you've lived in for years where the door is always slightly open, but the light inside is always off. She stopped. I think I didn't look hard enough because I didn't want to find anything. That kind of honesty, unprompted, undefended, was not something I'd expected. I didn't know exactly what I'd expected from this conversation, but it wasn't that. It took something I'd had coiled tightly in my chest since Sunday night and loosened it slightly. My daughter drew a picture of you, I said, and I don't know why I said it in that moment except that it felt true, and I was tired of not saying true things. She blinked. She did? Purple crayon. Very serious expression. She called you the airplane lady. I paused. She said you looked like someone who was used to being the one who saves people, not the one who gets saved. Alicia looked at me for a long moment. Something happened in her face that was hard to describe, like a room briefly lit from the inside and then carefully dimmed again. She's 7? She asked. 7 and 3 months, I said. She will absolutely tell you the 3 months matter. Something shifted at the corner of her mouth. Not quite a smile. The premise of one. She sounds like someone who pays attention. She really does, I said. Takes after her dad. And there it was. The smallest. Briefest. Completely genuine laugh, quiet as a breath, but real. She caught it almost immediately, pressed her lips together, looked down at her coffee. But I'd seen it, and it felt like something, though I couldn't have told you exactly what. We sat there for another hour and 40 minutes. I'm going to be honest about how that conversation went because I think it matters more than any of the dramatic stuff, more than the legal maneuvering, more than the complaint or the child services call or any of it. We talked, really talked, not strategically, not cautiously. She told me about taking over the company at 26 after her father's stroke, about the particular loneliness of being a woman that young in rooms full of men who'd spent decades deciding she was temporary. I told her about the night Angel's mom left, about standing in the kitchen at 2 in the morning with an 8-month-old against my chest, about the moment I decided that whatever came next, I was going to be exactly enough. She didn't say anything after that for a moment, and I was glad she didn't. Because there's a kind of thing you say that doesn't need a response, and it just needs to be heard. She asked me about the plane, about what exactly I'd seen, what had made me stop, what the feel of it had been in my hands. And I told her, in detail, the way I would have explained it to another mechanic. No simplification, no softening. And she followed every word of it with the same focused attention she'd given me in the hangar. At one point, she asked a question so specific it surprised me, and I asked her where she'd learned that, and she said her father had taught her basic aircraft systems when she was a teenager, because he believed if you were going to own something, you should understand how it could kill you. I thought about that for a while. The check came and we both reached for it at the same time, and there was a brief, mildly awkward moment where neither of us quite let go. And then she said, "I'll get it." And I said, "I have it." And then May appeared out of nowhere, took the check from between our hands with the quiet authority of a woman who had watched 1,000 negotiations and found them all mildly unnecessary, and said, "Split it," before either of us could respond. Then she walked away. Alicia looked after her with genuine respect. "I like her," she said. "Everyone likes May," I said. We walked out together into the thin Tuesday afternoon light and stood on the sidewalk for a moment in that slightly suspended way you stand after a conversation that went differently from how you expected. She had her canvas tote over her shoulder, a loose thread at the tear I'd noticed when she came in, and I had my hands in my jacket pockets, and we both looked at the street for a second. "I'm going to finish what I started," she said. "Internally. I have access. Callaway doesn't know I've started using. And I'm going to do it carefully enough that when it lands completely. Rebecca, my lawyer, she's building something too," I said. "Gerald Pruitt is part of it. The maintenance logs are part of it." Alicia nodded. "Then we're building the same thing from different directions." "Yeah," I said. "I think we are." Another pause. The wind moved through the street, rattling a loose awning above the diner. Somewhere down the block, a car horn sounded twice and stopped. "Your daughter," Alicia said. "Angel, right?" "Yeah." "Is she doing okay? With all of this?" The question landed somewhere soft. Because no one had asked me that. Not in those exact words, about her specifically. People had asked about the case, about my job, about my lawyer, about next steps, and I loved them for caring. But no one had asked about Angel. I cleared my throat. "She's okay," I said. "She doesn't know the details. She knows something is going on and she keeps checking my face to see if she needs to worry, so I try to give her a face that says she doesn't." Alicia looked at me in a way I didn't quite know how to categorize. Not pity. I would have felt that like sandpaper. Something more careful than that, more considered. "You're a good dad," she said simply. I nodded once. "Trying," I said. "Always just trying." She said goodbye. I said goodbye. She walked to her car, a navy blue sedan, modest for someone with her money, I noticed, though I wasn't sure why I noticed. And I stood on the sidewalk for a moment watching her go. And then I called Rebecca. "We need to coordinate," I said when she picked up. "Alicia Whitmore is pulling from inside the company. She has access we don't. If we time this right—" "I know," Rebecca said, and I could hear in her voice that she was already several steps ahead of me, which was exactly the right quality in the person you wanted in your corner. "I've been thinking about this since this morning. There's a board meeting at Whitmore Capital scheduled for 3 weeks from Thursday. If we can have everything documented and ready by then—" "It comes out in front of everyone," I said. "All at once," she said. No soft landing for him, no time to manage the narrative. A pause. "You ready for that?" I thought about Gerald Pruitt, 3 years unemployable for doing the right thing. I thought about the child services call, and the anonymous tip, and the deliberate calculation of a man who had decided that the cleanest way to protect himself was to come after my daughter. I thought about Angel's fox print socks and her diagonal sandwich and her purple crayon drawing and the face she made when she checked whether she needed to worry. "Yeah," I said, "I'm ready." 3 weeks. And Joseph Callaway had no idea what was coming. The 3 weeks between that Tuesday at May's and the board meeting were the quietest kind of busy I'd ever experienced. Not quiet like peaceful. Quiet like the pressure inside an engine before ignition and everything contained. Everything building. Nothing visible from the outside unless you knew exactly where to put your hand and feel for the vibration. I went through the motions of my days the way I always had. Got Angel up, made lunches, walked Wrencher, existed in the careful rhythm of a life built on routine. But underneath all of it, every single hour of every single day, something was assembling itself, piece by piece, document by document, conversation by conversation. Rebecca was a force I didn't have complete words for. In those 3 weeks, I watched her operate the way I watched a precision instrument work. No wasted movement, no unnecessary noise, nothing performed for an audience. She got the full maintenance logs for the Whitmore aircraft going back 22 months, not 18, because she said 18 might leave a gap someone could exploit, and she didn't believe in exploitable gaps. She got Gerald Pruitt on a recorded call, and then a second call, and by the end of the second call he'd agreed to provide a written statement. She cross-referenced Callaway's expense authorizations against the inspection sign-off timelines, and found 4 separate instances where aircraft had been cleared for flight with shortened inspection windows, each one correlating to a budget period where Callaway had reported under-projections in the maintenance cost line. 4 aircraft. Over 20 months. The Whitmore jet was just the one where someone had finally looked closely enough. She presented all of this to me on a Wednesday evening, spread across my kitchen table in a series of printed documents while Angel slept down the hall and Wrencher snored magnificently at my feet. And I sat there looking at it and felt something I hadn't expected to feel in that moment, which was a deep, almost physical grief. Not for myself, for the pilots who'd flown those aircraft not knowing, for the passengers who'd trusted that someone somewhere had looked closely enough, for Gerald Pruitt, who had looked closely enough and lost 3 years of his career for it. "Adam," Rebecca said, watching me. "You okay?" "Yeah," I said. I straightened the edge of one of the documents unnecessarily. "Yeah. This is bigger than I thought it was." "It usually is," she said. "That's why people like Callaway last as long as they do. They stay just inside the perimeter of what's clearly visible." She paused. "Until someone crouches down and looks twice." I looked at her. She said it completely plainly. No particular emphasis. Just a fact. But it landed the same way things land when they're true. Alicia and I had been in contact almost daily. I want to be careful about how I describe what was developing between us because I think the honest version is also the complicated version. And I've never been someone who simplifies things just to make them easier to say. It wasn't romantic yet. Not exactly, not in any way we'd named or moved toward deliberately. But it was something. There's a kind of closeness that develops between two people who are fighting the same thing from different sides of a wall, where the wall is temporary but the fighting is real. And somewhere in the middle of all of that, you start to realize you're not just sharing information anymore. You're sharing the weight. She called me one evening when I was on the back porch. The cold had sharpened into something genuinely wintry by then, and I had a blanket over my knees like an elderly man, which Angel had pointed out with tremendous satisfaction. And she talked for 20 minutes about a memory she had of her father walking her through the engine room of the first aircraft the company ever owned. Back when she was 11 years old. The way he'd spoken about it. The reverence he'd had for the mechanics. "They're the ones who make it real," he'd told her. "Anyone can own a plane. It takes a specific kind of person to understand one." She was quiet after that for a moment. "I think about that a lot lately," she said. "About your dad?" "About that specific thing he said," she said. "About what it takes to understand something. Not just own it, not just manage it. Actually understand it." A pause. "I've been running that company for 3 years, and I think there are things inside it I've been managing from a distance because getting closer felt like it would cost me something." Another pause. Turns out distance was the thing costing me. I didn't say anything for a moment. The wind moved through the bare oak tree and Wrencher bumped against the sliding door from inside, his version of making a point. "For what it's worth," I said finally, "I think the fact that you're saying that out loud means you already closed most of the distance." She was quiet. Then, "You know you're surprisingly decent at this." "At what?" "At saying the true thing without making it into a speech." I laughed a little. "It's a survival skill," I said. "When you're the only adult in a house with a 7-year-old who can detect insincerity at a range of approximately 40 feet, you learn to just say what you mean." She laughed too. Real, unguarded, the kind that happened before she could organize it. I'd heard it a few times by then, and each time it hit different, not because it was rare, exactly, but because of the contrast, the way it sat against everything else about her. All that precision and controlled energy, and just for a second broke it open. The Sunday before the board meeting, I told Angel. Not everything. Not the legal architecture, not the names, not the scope of what we'd built over 3 weeks. But enough. She deserved enough. She'd been living with the ambient tension for weeks. Checking my face every morning like a small barometer, and I thought about the contract I'd made with myself about honesty. And I decided she was old enough for a version of the truth that was true without being too heavy. I told her that a man at the company where the airplane was had tried to get me in trouble for doing my job right. That some people didn't like it when other people noticed things they weren't supposed to notice. That we'd been working hard to make sure the truth came out. She listened with both elbows on the table and her chin in her hands, her full attention posture. "Is it going to be okay?" she asked. "Yeah, Bug," I said. "It's going to be okay." "Are you sure?" I thought about Rebecca's documents spread across this same table. I thought about Gerald Pruitt's voice on a recorded call. I thought about Alicia pulling threads from the inside of a company she'd spent 3 years trying to understand. I thought about 4 aircraft, 22 months, a pattern that was finally visible in full. "I'm sure," I said. She nodded once, with the finality of someone who had received the information she needed and was ready to file it appropriately. Then she picked up her pencil and went back to her drawing. I watched her for a moment. "Don't mess it up," said the weight in my chest. "I know," I said back. The board meeting was on a Thursday at 10 in the morning. I wasn't there. I want to be clear about that. I wasn't in the room. I wasn't on a screen. I wasn't part of the formal proceeding in any official capacity. What I had done, in the days leading up to it, was provide Rebecca with a complete written account of everything, sworn and notarized, along with every piece of documentation I'd gathered from the beginning. Gerald Pruitt had done the same. Rebecca had packaged it with her own legal analysis and cross-referenced financial evidence, and submitted it formally to Whitmore Capital's board of directors, 48 hours in advance through proper legal channels. Which meant every single person in that room had read it, or should have read it before they walked through the door. Alicia had made sure they'd read it. I found out later, she told me herself that same evening, that she'd personally called each of the 7 board members the night before, not to lobby them, not to ask for anything specific, just to make sure no one could claim they hadn't had time to review the materials. She said it with a certain flat precision that told me she'd done it calmly and deliberately, and that the calls had been, in her words, brief but clear. I spent the morning of the board meeting doing something I'm almost embarrassed to tell you, which is that I took Wrencher for an extremely long walk. Like an unreasonable walk. We covered almost 4 miles, which for a basset hound is essentially a pilgrimage, and Wrencher's expression by the end of it had moved from his baseline dignified disappointment all the way to something approaching genuine existential contemplation. I'm pretty sure he forgave me eventually. I needed somewhere to put my body while my mind was somewhere else entirely. Rebecca called me at 12:17. "It's done," she said. I stopped walking. Wrencher stopped too, apparently sensing something, and looked up at me with those enormous liquid eyes. "Tell me," I said. She did. She told me that Joseph Calloway had walked into that board meeting apparently still believing he could manage the room, that he'd had enough relationships, enough history, enough carefully maintained goodwill to weather whatever was coming. She said that when the materials were formally presented, he'd attempted, initially, to reframe everything as a misunderstanding, a documentation error, a good faith oversight that had been maliciously characterized by a disgruntled employee. She said Alicia had let him finish, and then Alicia had presented the Gerald Pruitt documentation, the 4 aircraft, the 22 months, the correlated budget manipulations, the specific, precise itemized pattern of a man who had done this before and believed he was untouchable. She said the room went very quiet. She said Calloway had tried one more time, had started to say something about loyalty, about his history with the company, about what he'd built, and that one of the senior board members, a woman named Patricia Hale, who had been on the board for 11 years, had held up one hand and said simply, "Enough." He was placed on immediate administrative suspension pending a full forensic audit. Security had walked him out of the building. Not dramatically, not with a scene. Just quietly, efficiently. The way institutions handle things when the decision has already been made, and everyone in the room knows it. His access to company systems was revoked before he reached the parking garage. His lawyer called Rebecca 40 minutes later. I stood on a sidewalk 4 miles from my house with a philosophical basset hound at my feet, and I listened to all of this and I felt something move through me that I'm going to attempt to describe accurately, because I think it matters. It wasn't triumph exactly. It wasn't the clean, electric satisfaction you might expect from a story like this when the part comes where the bad guy finally gets what's coming to him. It was something quieter than that, something that had more texture. Relief, yes, enormous relief, but underneath it something almost like sadness. For Gerald Pruitt's 3 lost years, for the pilots and passengers of 4 aircraft who'd never know how close things had come, for the version of this story where nobody looked twice and nobody said anything, and Calloway kept going undisturbed for another 22 months. But also, and I'm going to let myself have this, something that felt like vindication in the truest sense of the word, not revenge. Vindication. The difference matters to me. Revenge is about making someone feel what you felt. Vindication is about the truth becoming visible, about reality insisting on itself. Finally, after someone spent a lot of energy trying to paper over it, the truth had insisted on itself. I took Rencher home. I made lunch. I picked Angel up from school. She'd had art class, and she'd made a clay pot that was, structurally speaking, not entirely sound, but which she presented to me in the car with the pride of someone unveiling a masterpiece. I told her it was magnificent. She told me I was biased. I told her that was correct, and also it was still magnificent. She put it on the kitchen counter and stood back and looked at it with her arms crossed, and the faint, private satisfaction of a person who has made something with their hands and knows it. I stood next to her and looked at it too. "Dad?" she said. "Yeah." "Did the true thing happen today?" I looked at her. I hadn't told her anything. I hadn't said a word since dropping her at school that morning, 7 years old, 40-foot sincerity radar. "Yeah, Bug," I said. "The true thing happened today." She nodded. Went to go find Rencher, called back over her shoulder. "Good. I made you something in art class too, but I left it at school. It's a portrait." "Of who?" A pause. The particular pause of someone deciding how much to reveal. "You and the airplane lady." I stood in the kitchen doorway and I looked at the structurally questionable clay pot on the counter and I laughed. Genuinely. Completely. The kind of laugh that comes from somewhere you didn't know was still loose. That evening, Alicia texted me. "It's done. He's out. Audit starts Monday. I wanted you to hear it from me." I wrote back. "I heard." Rebecca called. "Thank you for what you did in that room." A pause. Then, "Thank you for what you did in that hangar." Another pause. Then, "Angel still have her folding chair?" I smiled at my phone like an idiot. "She does. Think she'd be willing to bring it back sometime? I have a hangar of my own. I think she'd like it." I looked down the hall toward Angel's room, where I could hear her talking to Rencher in the particular earnest tone she used when she was explaining something important to him that he would never fully grasp. The clay pot sat on the counter behind me, imperfect and real and made with both hands. "Yeah," I typed back. "I think she'd like that a lot." I put the phone down, made dinner, set the table for 2, and for the first time and longer than I could cleanly remember, the house felt exactly the right size.